They said it couldn't be done, but they underestimated the power of an iron will and a steady heart. Watch as we bring you the most intense stories of perseverance and the final victory of the mind. Hit subscribe now and fuel your own fire with us.
Nah. They thought a man who works with his hands could never be enough for their daughter. They were wrong. And 15 years later, they finally had to face that. My father is a partner at Hargrove and Mills, one of the most respected law firms in Austin, Texas. My mother spent 20 years as a federal judge before she retired. Growing up, our house had a library with a rolling ladder, a dining room we only used on holidays, and a rule that you didn't bring anyone to the table who couldn't hold a conversation about constitutional law. I learned to read case briefs before I learned to drive. My future was never really a question in our house, it was a schedule. Pre-law at UT Austin, law school at Yale or Georgetown. Clerk for a federal judge, preferably one my mother knew personally. Then a career that would make the Hargrove name mean something for another generation. I never once thought to argue with it. Not until I met Marcus. I was 21 years old and in my junior year at UT, when the water heater in my off-campus apartment gave out in January. My landlord sent someone over the next morning. I answered the door in a law school sweatshirt and 2 pairs of socks, expecting some middle-aged guy with a toolbox. Instead, there was Marcus Webb, 24 years old, dark eyes, a worn canvas jacket with his company's logo on the chest, and a smile that made me forget I had a contract's midterm in 3 days. He was a licensed plumber who had just started working for a small outfit in South Austin. He fixed the water heater in 40 minutes, and then he stood in my kitchen doorway and asked if I wanted to grab coffee sometime. I said yes before I had time to think about what my mother would say. We dated quietly for 4 months. Dinners at small places, walks along the river, drives out to the hill country on weekends. Marcus was the kind of person who listened when you talked, who remembered the small things, who could sit in comfortable silence without needing to fill it. He was funny in a way that snuck up on you. He was the first person who ever made me feel like I didn't have to perform. With my family, I was always performing. The sharp daughter, the future attorney, the one who would carry the name forward. With Marcus, I was just Sarah. I told my parents about him in May, over dinner at their house. I kept it simple. I told them his name, that he was kind, that I liked him very much. My father asked what he did for a living. When I said he was a plumber, my father set down his fork. My mother looked at me the way she looked at opposing counsel when they'd said something she found beneath her. A plumber, my father said. Not a question, just the word, sitting there. He's hardworking and he's good to me, I said. I'm sure he is, my mother said. But Sarah, you have to think about what you're doing. You're 2 years from law school applications. The people you associate with at this stage reflect on you. Recruiters notice these things. I almost laughed. Recruiters. I was telling them I'd met someone who made me genuinely happy for the first time in years, and she was talking about recruiters. The conversation didn't end there. Over the following weeks, my father called me twice to explain, carefully and at length, why this was a mistake. Not because Marcus was a bad person. My father was always careful to say that. But because we were from different worlds. Different trajectories. He said the word incompatibility so many times it stopped sounding like a real word. My mother sent me an article about how educational mismatch is the leading predictor of marital dissatisfaction. I read it and then I called Marcus and told him I was falling in love with him. 6 months later, I brought Marcus to Thanksgiving dinner. He brought a pie he'd made himself. A pecan pie from a recipe his grandmother had written on an index card that he kept in his wallet. He shook my father's hand. He complimented my mother on the house. He talked about his work with genuine enthusiasm, the satisfaction of solving a problem with his hands, the pride of building something with a small crew from the ground up. He was warm and present and completely himself. My parents were polite in the way that people are polite when they've already decided something. After dinner, while Marcus helped my brother clear the table, my mother pulled me into the hallway. "He's charming," she said. "That's not the issue." "Then what is the issue?" You know what the issue is, Sarah. This is not the life we raised you for. I looked at her for a long moment. Maybe I want a different life than the one you planned. She looked at me like I'd said something in a foreign language. 3 months after that Thanksgiving, I told my parents I was leaving law school. I had finished 2 years and I was done. I didn't want to practice law. I'd never really wanted to. I wanted to go back to the nursing program I'd quietly researched. The one at St. Murrain, Edwards, the one I'd looked up and closed the browser on a dozen times because it didn't fit the schedule. And I wanted to marry Marcus. My father said if I walked away from law school to marry a plumber, I was walking away from this family. I thought he meant it as a warning. It turned out he meant it as a fact. The week after I got engaged, my mother called to tell me they would not be attending the wedding. She said it calmly, like she was declining an event that had nothing to do with her. She said they hoped one day I would understand what I'd thrown away. Then she said goodbye, and the line went quiet, and I sat on the floor of my apartment for a long time. Marcus found me there. He sat down beside me without saying anything. He took my hand. "We can wait," he said. "If you need time. If you think they'll come around." "They won't," I said. "Then we go forward," he said. "Just us." We got married on a Saturday in October at a small venue outside Austin. My maid of honor was my college roommate. Marcus's older sister stood up for us. His parents drove 6 hours from San Antonio. My brother came, my younger brother Daniel, 20 at the time. And he sat in the front row and cried through the whole ceremony. After it was over, he hugged me for a long time and didn't say anything. He was the only one from my side of the family. I finished nursing school 2 years later. Marcus grew his small operation into a full plumbing and HVAC company, Web Home Services, with 8 full-time employees. We bought a house in a quiet neighborhood in Round Rock with a big backyard and a kitchen that got afternoon light. We had a daughter named Lily, and then, 3 years after Lily, a son named Owen. Life didn't look like the schedule my parents had made for me. It looked like something better. I heard from my family through Daniel, mostly. He visited when he could. He told me my father had made partner at a second firm, that my mother had taken on a consulting role, that they were fine. They never asked about Marcus directly. They sometimes asked about the kids in a careful, distant way, like they were asking about people they'd read about in a letter. I always answered, I didn't ask about them. Lily grew up knowing her father's parents, her grandma Rosa, who sent her birthday cards stuffed with little notes in Spanish, and her grandpa Dale, who taught her to fish and showed up to every school performance with flowers. She knew my brother Daniel, who visited twice a year and treated her like she hung the moon. She did not grow up knowing her other grandparents. When she was old enough to ask about them, I told her the truth as gently as I could, that her grandparents on my side had made a choice a long time ago, and that choice had consequences, and that those consequences were not her fault and were not mine. She accepted that with more grace than I had at her age. Lily was 14 when my mother first reached out. It was an email, not a phone call, not a letter, an email, sent on a Tuesday afternoon with the subject line, "Checking in." She said she'd been thinking about me. She said she hoped the children were well. She mentioned that my father had not been in the best of health. She said she hoped we might find a way to talk sometime. She did not say she was sorry. She did not say she had been wrong. She said she hoped we might find a way to talk. I read the email twice. Then I closed my laptop and went to the kitchen and started making dinner and didn't answer it. Marcus noticed I was quiet that evening. I showed him the email after the kids were in bed. He read it carefully, the way he read everything. "What do you want to do?" he asked. "I don't know yet," I said. "You don't have to decide tonight." I didn't answer the email that week, or the next. I thought about it constantly. I thought about what it would mean to open that door again. What my mother was actually asking for. I thought about my daughter, who was curious and kind and deserved to know where she came from. I thought about the Thanksgiving when Marcus had brought a pecan pie, and my parents had looked at him like he was something that needed to be managed. I did not answer the email. 2 months later, I got a phone call. It was my father. I hadn't heard his voice in almost 13 years. It was the same voice, measured, precise, the voice of a man accustomed to being listened to. But there was something underneath it I had never heard before, something careful, something that took effort. He told me his name when I picked up, which struck me as strange, that he would introduce himself to his own daughter. He said he'd asked my mother to reach out first because he thought it would go better that way. He said he'd been having some health issues. He said he didn't want to alarm me, but that the doctors had found something with his kidneys. Chronic kidney disease, stage 4. He was being evaluated for the transplant list, but the wait was long. His physician had suggested that family members be tested as potential donors. I held the phone and listened. He said he understood this was a significant ask. He said he knew things had not been right between us. He said he wanted me to know that he and my mother had thought about me and the children often over the years. He said the word regret once, briefly, and then moved quickly past it, back to the medical details. When he finished, I said I would need some time to think. He said of course. He said he understood. He thanked me for picking up. I sat in my car in the driveway for 40 minutes after I hung up. That evening I talked to Marcus for a long time. He didn't tell me what to do. He never did. He said whatever I decided, he would be with me. He said the kids were old enough to be told something true, that their grandfather was sick. Without being told everything, he said that if I decided I wanted to pursue testing, he would support that completely. He said if I decided I didn't, he would support that too. He said the only thing he wouldn't support was me torturing myself trying to figure out what everyone else wanted, instead of asking what I needed. I sat with it for 2 weeks. What I kept coming back to was not my father's voice on the phone, or the email with no apology, or the October wedding 13 years ago where one side of the ceremony had been almost empty. What I kept coming back to was my daughter. Lily was 14. She was curious about everything, and fierce about fairness in the way teenagers can be when no one has yet talked them out of it. She had started asking more questions about my family lately. My brother Daniel she adored, but the others, the ones she'd never met, she wanted to understand. She didn't ask with anger. She asked with genuine curiosity, the way she asked about everything she was trying to figure out. One evening she found me in the kitchen and sat down at the counter and said, "Mom, are you going to help Grandpa Harold?" I looked at her. "How do you know about that?" "I overheard. I wasn't trying to." "I'm sorry." I sat down across from her. "I don't know yet." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I think you should do whatever you need to do for yourself. Not for him. But I want you to know that whatever you decide, you're not a bad person. You're actually the opposite." I cried. Right there in the kitchen, and she came around the counter and hugged me the way my mother had not hugged me the night I told her I was engaged. The way nobody in that house on the hill had hugged me when I needed it. Marcus was standing in the doorway. He didn't say anything. He just watched our daughter hold me together, and his expression was the same one he'd had the day she was born. Like he couldn't quite believe something this good had happened to him. I called my father back the following week. I told him I would be tested. I want to be very clear about why, not because of the money they had mentioned. And yes, they had mentioned money, a contribution toward the children's college funds, which I found both predictable and sad, and not because I felt I owed them anything. I did it because I needed to be able to look my daughter in the eye for the rest of my life, and know that I had not let someone die out of bitterness. That was the only reason. The testing took several weeks. I went to appointments alone. I did not tell my parents which days I was going. I did not invite my mother to come. She called twice during that period, and both times the conversation was the same. Careful, polite, skating along the surface of everything that had not been said. At the end of the testing process, I sat down with the transplant coordinator and the nephrologist. They walked me through the results. They told me I was not a compatible donor for my father. I sat with that for a moment. I tried to figure out what I felt. It wasn't relief, exactly. It wasn't disappointment either. It was something quieter and stranger than both. I called my father with the results. I told him I was sorry it hadn't worked out. I told him I hoped they would find a match through the registry. He thanked me for trying. His voice, for the first time in that entire process, sounded like it belonged to a person who was afraid. I said, "Dad, I want to say something." He said, "Okay." I said, "I don't know if we can have a relationship. I don't know if what's been broken can be fixed, or if I even have the energy to find out. But I want you to know that I forgive you. Not because you've earned it, not because of what you asked me to do these past weeks. I forgive you because I've been carrying this for 15 years and I'm tired. And because my daughter looked at me one night in a kitchen and reminded me who I am, and I want to be the kind of person who can let it go." My father was quiet for a long time. Then he said in a voice I had never heard from him before, small, stripped of everything professional, everything polished. He said, "I never deserved you as a daughter. I didn't say anything, and Marcus," he said. "I was wrong about Marcus. I was wrong from the beginning, and I knew it, and I didn't stop. Tell him I'm sorry." I told him I would. We ended the call. I sat in my car again. I seemed to do a lot of processing in my car, and I let myself cry, not for what I'd lost, not even for what might still be salvaged. I cried for the 21-year-old version of me who had sat on an apartment floor listening to a dial tone, who had gotten married without her parents in the room, who had built an entire life on the conviction that love and capability were not determined by what you did for a living. That night, Marcus came home to find me cooking dinner and Lily doing homework at the kitchen table, and Owen asleep on the couch under a blanket, which was not where he was supposed to be sleeping. The kitchen had good afternoon light that had turned into good evening light, and something was on the stove, and it smelled like something my mother-in-law had taught me, and Marcus stood in the doorway for a moment taking all of it in. "How'd it go?" he asked. "I'm not a match," I said. He nodded. "How are you?" I thought about it for a real second before I answered. "Good," I said. "Actually good." He came into the kitchen and kissed me on the forehead and looked in the pot on the stove and said it smelled incredible, and Lily said something that made us both laugh, and Owen stayed asleep on the couch. And outside the window, the Texas evening was doing what it does. That particular orange light that makes everything look like it's been here forever. We are still here. We are still the family we built. Marcus's company just brought on its 12th employee this spring. I work 3 days a week at a pediatric clinic, and I love every hour of it. Lily is applying to colleges this fall. She wants to study environmental science, which has nothing to do with law, and I told her that was perfect. Owen wants to be a firefighter or possibly a paleontologist, depending on the day. My father is on the transplant list. They found a potential match through the registry recently. I hope it works out. My mother called me last week. Not about anything medical this time. She just called. We talked for 20 minutes. It was stilted and strange and honest in a way our conversations have never been before. She said she'd like to meet the kids someday. If I was open to it, I said I would think about it, and that it would be up to them as much as me, because they were old enough now to have opinions about the people in their lives. She said that was fair. It is a long way from fair. It is a long way from okay. There are 15 years between who we were and who we are now, and I have no interest in pretending those years didn't happen, or that a few careful phone calls can settle the debt of them. But I am not carrying the weight of it anymore. I set it down in a kitchen while my daughter held me together, and I don't intend to pick it back up. They thought a man who works with his hands was not enough for their daughter. That man built me a home, raised our children with everything he had, held my hand through the hardest years of my life without once asking for credit. He is, without question, the best person I know. I am exactly where I am supposed to be. And I got here by choosing him,